All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How you guys doing?
Good,
I'm
thank you.
good.
How about you?
Good. Doing well.
Good.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get into our day. Do I have anybody that would like to pray for the day to start us off?
I'll pray.
All right. Thanks, Rob. Go ahead and pray.
All right. Dear Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for everything that you've blessed. Pray that we would have a great day in class today. And I pray that anybody that's sick would get better, and anybody that needs help with the fires that you would help them. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. So everybody get a chance to finish their readings for homework last night?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. So we're going to start off today with a discussion of what we read. All right. And so last night, along with those readings, I assigned you guys a few questions to keep in mind. All right. So just to remind you guys, I asked you guys to consider these different questions. Okay. Number one, how did the use of logic help in conversion to Christianity? Number two, what role did politics play in conversion? And lastly, number three, what was the stabilizing force holding Europe together? So based on what we read, does anybody have any initial thoughts or ideas that they want to open up to the class right now on what they read?
Well, my question is, are the questions concerning which reading specifically?
Either reading. So you could have looked at the questions from either of the two readings that we posed.
Oh. Well, I can answer the first one.
Go for it.
Well, in terms of how logic helped with the conversion, one of the popes, I can't exactly remember his name right now, but he was asked by another pope to use logic to convert instead of simply using force to convert the people.
Exactly.
And yeah, and logic played a big part because that was what they used primarily, specifically this pope, to convert the people and helped in the spread of Christianity.
Yeah, definitely. One of the primary documents we read was one of Saint Boniface's sacred missions to Germany, right? And so the Pope, or the religious leaders, are stressing to him to not try to just basically tell these pagans. He's saying, don't just go and tell them, hey, what you believe is wrong. The gods you follow are all false. He's asking them to use logic and reasoning to have a conversation with them. So he wants them to approach it from a standpoint where a conversation can take place, as opposed to him just coming to them and saying, everything you believe is false, right? Does anybody else have some thoughts or opinions on what we read?
I was gonna just say I agree with what you and Nazari say, because I was just gonna say something similar. But for the third question, it says, what was the stabilizing force holding Europe together? And I was thinking, but it says, they were sometimes so much weakened and reduced that they promised to renounce the worship of devils and to adopt Christianity. And so I thought the stabilizing force that was holding Europe together was Christianity, because they would return to that when they were in troubles and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Christianity became such a key factor in Western civilization, and especially during this time period after Roman collapse, and you're in a time period of chaos and confusion. Christianity became a stabilizing factor. It brought various things like law and order. It brought morality to the land, and it did a number of things that caused people to be unified. And so, oftentimes we don't realize how big of an impact Christianity had on the Middle Ages, right? Anybody else have any thoughts before we move forward? Luigi?
Yeah, so I read a part of the book where they were mentioning how the pagans believed that their gods would punish anyone that didn't worship them.
Hmm.
But it also said that they asked them, how come us Christians that refuse to worship them, how come they don't punish us?
Yeah.
Which is logic, right?
Yeah, yeah. So they used a lot of logic, whereas before in in history previous to this, a lot of the times beliefs were pushed upon people in a more forcible fashion, right? Where it's you believe the way we do, and if you don't, you could face being outcast, even face execution, right? And so logic was a valuable factor within the conversion to Christianity in most of Europe. However, in our second reading, we read a little bit about Charlemagne, right? And this talked about there were aspects of force, right? And so, although logic and reasoning were key players, there still were certain individuals that would use a certain degree of force. And so, that is something we have to keep in mind as well. So from that reading that we read about the forcible conversions under Charlemagne, did you guys pick up anything that demonstrated why Charlemagne chose to use force?
Well, from what this is more of a wild guess,
Mm-hmm.
but what I saw was that the Saxons who he was trying to, sorry,
That's okay.
the Saxons he was trying to convert, I'm pretty sure he deemed them too barbaric because it emphasizes that murders were happening and that the people were generally acting uncivilized. So
Yeah.
perhaps Charlemagne deemed them too uncivilized and illogical to even try reasoning with. So instead, he tried to convert them forcibly. It's a
Exactly.
wild guess, but that's what I think.
No, that's spot on. And so Charlemagne realized that the chaos that was taking place was due to this lack of morality or this lack of self-governing on the various tribes that they had invaded. And so he chose to use more of a standpoint where he would force them to convert to essentially do away with some of the wickedness in his eyes that these people were involving themselves in. And so he still used a certain degree of logic because he thought it would bring order and it would bring about a lot of positive outcomes. But there's still a certain degree of force that was used. And so we have these various different ideas and ways in which individuals were converted. And that's what we're going to be discussing today throughout our lecture. And so with that being said, we're going to jump into our lecture for today. So you guys, if you have any questions throughout our lecture, please feel free to raise your hand and I will stop and answer those questions. And go ahead and get your notes ready and we'll get into this. I'm going to share my screen with you guys and we'll be off. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, well, let's jump into this lecture today. All right, so today we're talking about the Germanic conversion to Christianity. And so there's various factors we're going to look at. Okay, so there's, like we talked about just a second ago in our warm-up discussion, right? There were various different strategies that were used to convert the various groups of people. There was accommodation. There was reasoning, well, something we talked about specifically. There's a focus on leaders in a sense of there are certain leaders that played a vital role in implementing Christianity as the main religion or belief system in the various different communities that existed. There were supernatural demonstrations. Various individuals believed they had signs or wonders happen, whether it was in battle or in a dream or in their life that caused this this change or this shift in the belief to Christianity. And lastly, there's this idea of force we talked about, which was one of the instruments that Charlemagne used to a certain degree. All right, so those are some of the ideas and the strategies that we're going to look at throughout this lecture. All right, so some of the strengths of this conversion to Christianity, there were a lot of mass conversions. All right, so it spread quickly throughout Europe. And so in the 4th century, the early process of Christianization of the various Germanic people was partly facilitated by the prestige of the Christian Roman Empire among European pagans. Until the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Germanic tribes who had migrated there, with the exception of the Saxon, Franks, and Lombards, had converted to Christianity. And so massive groups were converting at a very fast rate to Christianity. And so what you have is you have a loyalty to leaders who brought political loyalty to the faith and to the Pope. And so you have these various leaders who are beginning to pledge their allegiance to individuals like the Pope, right? And so if you're the leader of a certain tribe or a certain group and you convert yourself, well, there was also a loyalty from your, whether it be your army or your people, to convert as well. And so if a leader decided this is something that I believe in, I believe is right, well, most oftentimes, the whole community would follow suit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right? And so this was, in the beginning, it says it was not forcing immediate change, saved converts from cultural alienation. So what that means is they weren't forcing immediate change, right? It does. So what that means is when an individual essentially got saved or converted to Christianity, it was a process. It wasn't like they got changed and all of a sudden, boom, their pagan beliefs or rituals or things just vanished, right? And so you can think about in today's day and age, for example, if someone walks into a church and gets saved, it's not like all their lifestyle and their habits are automatically just, boom, changed. Everything's okay. Everything's right in their life. Does that make sense? And so there was still some assimilation that needed to take place. And although individuals got saved in such massive groups and it spread so fast, there was still a lot of conversion and a lot of change inside people's minds and hearts that had to take place as well. Does that make sense? Are we good so far?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move forward. All right. And so some of the weaknesses, we just looked at various strengths of conversions to Christianity in the Germanic tribes. Some of the weaknesses were a compromise of Christian and pagan values. So because it happened so rapidly, there were many individuals that kind of held on to their pagan values, right? It's kind of like the idea of peer pressure, so to speak, if I'm trying to relate to you guys, right? If the majority of a group is doing something and you are part of that group, you feel pressured to do what everybody else is doing, right? And so many people would confess a conversion to Christianity. However, they did not want to let go of their pagan values or their pagan rituals. And so you have a lot of people who decided, I will now identify as this. However, there are certain things I'm not going to let go of. And so what that means is, for some people, it was more of a political decision, not a personal relationship, which is something that still happens today in what we deal with in terms of politics is a great example, right? A lot of people will identify as something in politics. However, they may not necessarily believe it or agree with it, but if it makes them look good and it draws attention to them, well, then they'll run with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for many individuals, it was very real, and there was a personal relationship that was established with God. However, there was also many who just, it was more of a political stance, and there was no real relationship that took place in terms of talking with God and trying to convert their ideas and their values and their morals and such on and so forth. All right. So one of the first things we talked about was Christian accommodation, right? So a lot of people, they felt like it was, it was good to be accommodated. It was a good accommodation for a lot of people, right? For some people, it was like, this works for everybody else, so therefore it's going to work for me. All right, we're not going to spend too much time on this slide. All right, so now we're going to start looking at different groups of people and their conversions to Christianity and the process in which it happens. And so the Franks in particular had a leader named Clovis. All right, and so he was the German chief in modern day France. And so just a little bit of background about him. His wife was a Christian, which is a common theme in history. And so you see on that slide, it says, baby saved by prayer, Clovis victorious in battle. So those were two key things that took place in Clovis's life that caused him to become a believer, right? And to convert himself and his people to Christianity. And so I'm going to read you a little cert from something to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. And so it so turned out that when the two armies met on the battlefield, and so this was when Clovis and his army were on the battlefield, okay, there was a great slaughter, and the troops of Clovis were rapidly being annihilated. He raised his eyes to heaven. When he saw this, felt compunction in his heart, and was moved to tears. Jesus Christ, he said, you who maintains to be the Son of the living God, you who deign to give help to those in travail and victory to those who trust in you in faith, I beg the glory of your help. And so there's this moment in battle, we're going to keep reading in a second, where Clovis and his men are experiencing great annihilation. They are not winning this battle, right? And so he decided to call upon the name of Jesus in the middle of his battle, okay? So we're going to pick this up where he says, if you will give me victory over my enemies, and if I may have evidence of that miraculous power which the people dedicated to your name say that they have experienced, then I will believe in you, and I will be baptized in your name. And so this is a common thing you see even in today's day and age. You are in the midst of a trial. You are in the midst of a difficult place. You call upon God and you say, God, if you get me out of this situation, I'll dedicate my life to you, or I'll dedicate all that I am to you. And so this is essentially what Clovis was doing in the midst of this very important battle in his life. All right. And so it said, and then he continues to say, and this is a very important thing to understand. He says, I have called upon my own gods, but as I see only too clearly, they have no intention of helping me. I therefore cannot believe that they possess any power, for they do not come to assistance of those who trust in them. I now call upon you. I want to believe in you, but I must first be saved from my enemies. Even as he said this, the enemies turned their backs and began to run away. As soon as they saw that their king was killed, they submitted to Clovis. So let's break this down a little bit, right? So he's in the midst of a difficult situation. He calls upon God, and he feels that God has come through. Now, it's important to understand this, that he specifically said, I had called upon my own gods, and they did not come through. And so what is that kind of exemplifying in terms of the various ways we're looking at conversion of the Germanic tribes to Christianity? What strategy is that?
Can you say that one more time, the first part?
Yeah, so he specifically talked about how in this battle, he said, I have called upon my own gods, but they have not come to my aid, right? And so eventually he calls upon Jesus, and he feels like Jesus comes through. So what type of idea is that in terms of looking at this conversion in the Middle Ages to Christianity?
That's the thing.
Yeah.
What's the email evidence?
So what do you guys think?
It's reasoning in a way.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you, Luigi. It's reasoning, right? He's saying, I have served these gods all my life, right? These different pagan gods that they had. And there were many, right? He's like, I've served these gods all my life, and I have never felt them essentially come through for me. So he's saying, you know what? I'm going to call upon Jesus. I'm going to essentially give this a chance. And immediately in his life, he experiences victory. And so he says, because of this, I am going to convert to Christianity. And not only am I going to convert to Christianity, but as it shows on our slide, himself and 3,000 of his soldiers began to follow this Christian religion, right? And so
Yep.
that shows reasoning. He's saying, what I have subscribed to my whole life has not worked, and I'm going to try something different. And through that experiences, he realizes that Jesus was the one that has come through for him. So he's using logic. Are there any questions? You guys all right? All
Yeah.
right.
Would that be a focus on leaders?
Huh?
Wouldn't that also be a focus on leaders?
Exactly. Thank you for bringing that up, Luigi. Yeah, that's a focus on leaders. So this leader had this experience with God, like we talked about in one of our first slides, right? And because of that, he explains to his men that this was a divine moment where God came through. And so they're inspired by that as well. And so in staying loyal to their leader, they as well all commit to Christianity, right? So excellent. There are two different ways in which these conversions took place in terms of the Franks. All right. And so this was a quote from Clovis. He says, like we talked about, I have tried my gods and they have deserted me. I call on thee, only save me. And so in a moment of need, Jesus comes through. He said, I have tried my gods and they left me hanging. They deserted me. However, I called upon Jesus and he saved me. Right? All right. So let's move forward. All right. And so this is just another example of Clovis. He said, bend thy neck, worship that you burned, and burn what you worshipped. Okay? And so he's saying there's a change taking place in what we will worship and where I will give my praise, essentially. All right. So what is the impact of this? All right. So what this did, this particular moment, is it planted seeds of a Christian kingdom among the Franks, and later on through Charlemagne, who we discussed in the beginning of our readings and our discussion today. All right, so it provided for a spread and protection for the church in Europe and in Rome. And it also provided a German corridor from Rome to Britain. And so looking at this individual on here, Charlemagne, okay, the Pope crowned him the Roman Emperor in 800 AD, centuries after the ancient Roman Empire had collapsed in Europe, a move which infuriated the Eastern Emperor, who still claimed to rule both East and West. His Holy Roman Empire shrank rapidly after his death, but it remained a major force in Europe to the Reformation. Although centered in modern Germany, its influence spread much wider. And so we have this second leader we're looking at, who is Charlemagne, right? And through Charlemagne, there was a resurgence of Christianity in the Roman territories, where many Christians previously faced severe persecution. And so one of the reasons that Rome's collapsed, right, was due to a lack of morality, right? We've discussed that in prior lectures. And if you were a Christian in Rome at one point, there was severe persecution. And so when the Christians were persecuted, there was a lot of morality that was persecuted with that. So those two things went hand in hand. And so when Charlemagne in 800 AD, he was crowned, although there wasn't technically a Roman Empire, but he was ruling where Rome previously was in the West. He was deemed as the Roman Emperor in 800. And he brought this resurgence of Christianity back into these Roman territories, right? Which allowed for the protection of the church throughout Europe as well as in Rome. And so this is significant. This is huge. So whereas before in this territory you could face severe persecution, you now had the protection from the king to worship freely, which was profound. And those ideas have stuck till today, especially in a place like where we live today, the United States. Freedom of religion, right? We are protected under the law, right? Within the Bill of Rights. So this is another example how these things that were forming in Europe would eventually continue to move west, right? Western civilization, and these ideas would spread. And so these were some of the groundwork for ideas that are still around today. Are there any questions? You guys okay? All right, let's keep moving. All right, so looking at another group, the Britons. All right, so the Romano Christians were overcome by pagan Anglo-Saxons, okay? So the Christianization of the Anglo-Saxons in England was a process spanning the 7th century. It was essentially the result of the Gregorian mission of 597, which was joined by the efforts of Hiberno-Scottish missions from the 630s. From the 8th century, the Anglo-Saxon mission was in turn instrumental in the conversion of the population of the Frankish empires. Okay, so this is talking about this group being converted in particular. All right, so there were also conversions from northern Celts, who were known as modern day Scots, okay, and Roman missionaries from the south. And so Christianity is spreading all throughout Europe. It's spreading through Eastern to Western Europe. It's spreading in Central Europe. And so what was taking place in this slide specifically, where there was British converts that would get saved, and they would then send missionaries back into other places of Europe, say Central Europe, for example. All right. And so the Gregorian mission of Augustinian, which was a Christian mission sent by Pope Gregory the Great in 596, was one of the individuals that converted the Britons or the Anglo-Saxons, okay? And so the mission was headed by Augustine of Canterbury, who was a very well-known and well-renowned missionary who traveled and spread the word of God to these various different tribes throughout Europe. And so by the time of the death of the last missionary in 653, the mission had established Christianity in southern Britain. Along with the Irish and Frankish missions, it converted other parts of Britain as well and influenced even parts of continental Europe. All right, so now we're going to shift from different groups of people, and we're going to look at some of these key leaders or individuals who impacted a shift from pagan beliefs into Christianity in the various Germanic tribes. All right, so here are some notable missionaries. All right, so we have St. Augustine of Canterbury. Okay, and so St. Augustine was the first Archbishop of Canterbury and of one of the apostles to England. Okay, so he founded the Christian church in southern England. All right. Secondly, St. Patrick, who was a Romano Christian, converts the Irish. All right. You guys have all heard of St. Patrick, right? Very instrumental figure in history. All right. He is still celebrated to this day. Right. And who is St. Patrick known for converting?
The Irish.
The Irish. Okay. And so when we celebrate St. Patrick's Day, it is not just about drinking. It's not just about putting on a green t-shirt or wearing some form of green so you don't get pinched by your by your classmate, right? It's much bigger than that, right? St. Patrick chose to go to Ireland and to spread the gospel, right, to a pagan people where he would face possible persecution. And so instead of facing persecution, he has major success and converts these people from their pagan beliefs and rituals and ideas, right, into believing in Christ and changing the way that they live, which is huge. All right. And lastly, we're looking at Saint Boniface, who was an English missionary to Europe, right? And he is someone that we looked at today and discussed early in our discussions, right? We looked at his sacred mission to Germany, and discussed that at the beginning of class, right? So a very instrumental and key figure.
I have one question.
Yes, go for it,
It's a
Nazar.
bit irrelevant, but it's concerning St. Patrick.
Yes.
I still don't understand why exactly they decided to call him St. Patrick if that's not his real name. Where did the name originate?
I have to get back to you on that. I'm not 100% sure why he was, recognized or labeled as Saint Patrick.
Oh, sorry. All right, never mind then.
Oh no, it's okay. There's various individuals in history who were recognized as something else, and I don't have all the answers as to exactly why they got those names. So, for example, we talked about Charlemagne. He was recognized as the Holy Roman Emperor, although he was not the Emperor of Rome because Rome did not exist really in the West, right, at that point. And so there's things like that have taken place. But that's a great question, Azari, and I'll look into that and I'll get back to you by tomorrow and let you know where that originated. That's a great question.
Thank you. Also, one more question. Do you think any other saints' names on this slide are also not real?
Yeah, I mean, multiple people, so a lot of times what happened in history is you may have been given a name by, a leader, that recognized you. And so that way you were remembered in history as that. And then as time goes forward in history, sometimes your legacy may cause you to get various different, I guess the easiest way to describe it is nicknames, right? And so there are certain people in history who are recognized as due to their actions and are given nicknames, right? Or alternate egos, so to speak. And that's why they're recorded that way in history, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
You got it. Naomi?
Can I answer Nazari's question? I had that study in church once.
Of course you can. That's wonderful. Go ahead, Naomi.
So yeah, he wasn't born with the name Patrick, but once he became a priest, he changed his name to Patricius, something like that. But it's more commonly known now as Patrick. That's why people call him Saint Patrick, because that name used to mean father figure.
I see.
Have it. Naomi, thank you for that. That's excellent. That's why we have discussions and opportunity for questions. It's great as a teacher, you guys learn a lot from me, but I also can learn a lot from you. So thank you for that input, Naomi. I learned something today.
I guess it does kind of make sense that something related to Patrick would mean father figure because of like patriarch, which would mean a leading father figure. So yeah, it does kind of make sense.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, let's keep moving forward. All right, so this is a quote from St. Patrick. He says, "If I be worthy, I live for God to teach the heathen, even though they may despise me." All right, and so this is what we talked about a second ago, in which he was willing to face his fears, right? And he says, "If I be worthy to live for God, even to teach the heathen, I'm going to do that, even though they may despise me, or they may condemn me, or they may criticize me, or I may even face severe persecution." He said, "This is the ultimate goal for my life, and there was nothing that will stop me from doing what I feel called to do." Right? Which is something we see today in our lives, right? Some of us know various missionaries or pastors who feel called to go somewhere, And they say, no matter what it takes, no matter what persecution I may face, I am going to fulfill what God has called me to do. And there's great respect and there should be great recognition for individuals like that who are willing to take that stance and that stand despite what they may face. Okay. All right. So this is just giving you a little bit of imagery of Saint Boniface, okay? So this looks like it's a conversion from of people, okay, to Christianity. However, certain individuals that did go and convert groups of people to Christianity, like we talked about, there were those that continued to hold on to their pagan practices, and so some missionaries and some individuals would still face persecution. It was a very real thing, and it wasn't something that we can forget. All right, and so here's a quote from St. Boniface. He said, "Let us be neither dogs that do not bark, nor silent onlookers, nor paid servants who run away before the wolf. Instead, let us be careful shepherds watching over Christ's flock. Let us preach the whole of God's plan to the powerful and to the humble, to rich and to poor, to men of every rank and age, as far as God gives us the strength in season and out of season." Does someone want to give me an idea after reading this quote? Maybe read through it one more time and give me your thoughts on this quote.
Well, to me, it seems like missionaries back then seemed to be much more determined back then. It seems like all of their quotes relate to preaching as long as they can.
Yeah.
They
Yes.
seem very determined.
Yes. Yes. Dedication was huge. Naomi, want to say something?
Personally, I feel like in this quote, it kind of shows a balance of logically trying to get people to, listen to God, and then also that kind of persistent force that, sometimes has to be involved so they listen in a way. So he's saying like not dogs that like do not bark or like silent because they need to listen to the word he's teaching. So I feel like he's showing the balance that Christianity needs.
Oh, it's excellent. Great interpretation. Luigi.
I think that it shows us that missionaries back then really knew that they were facing persecution from non-converts, and they knew that there were lots of hardships that they would have to face.
Yeah.
So they were very determined to take this as seriously as possible because they knew that there were dangerous things and bad people that would be in their way, but they were very brave
Yeah,
and they had a lot of faith in what they did.
definitely. What about you, Rob?
I think mine's gonna kind of could go off what Luigi said because I think that he was trying to encourage other missionaries as well. Like, don't just be in the corner, huddle up. Like, get out there and preach the gospel. Take care of what God wants you to take care of, and so, yeah.
Excellent. Hey, George, what about you? What do you think about the missionaries that got people saved back in the Middle Ages? What do you think about that?
Them
What do you
when
think?
they, it's when God put his hand on them to heal them.
Yeah, and do you think God called them to go and to preach and to help people and to get people saved?
No.
You don't think God called
Yeah,
them
he
to?
did.
Oh, yeah. So what they did, George, is pretty powerful, huh?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for your input, George.
Do you have one more thought regarding this?
Yes, go for it. Sorry.
It's regarding those paintings that I saw earlier. It seemed to depict many one of the paintings seemed to depict one of the missionaries getting killed. Are there any notable missionaries that you know of that got killed in their process of preaching?
Not off the bat. However, it did occur a lot later in terms of when we're going to look at after the Reformation. We faced we're going to look at the Inquisition. There's a lot of martyrs that died during that time period that we're going to look into a little bit later in the course. But during this time period, I don't really know of anybody that was notably killed. However, it does become a major event that takes place a little bit later in history. So we're going to see how Christianity affects not just this time period, but as moving forward, there are going to be continuations of where Christianity thrives and where there's great persecution of Christianity, which is kind of a theme throughout history. So that'll be more what we look at in terms of the Inquisition a little bit later.
I see. Thank you.
All right. What about you, Isaiah? Did you have any thoughts on this quote at all?
To piggyback off of what Luigi said, pretty much that if I think that it means like if God's calling you to preach, that you should go out and preach to the whole nation, and, like share and like let other people hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think one of the key things that can be highlighted in terms of this whole quote was he says, let us preach the whole of God's plan to the powerful and to the humble, to the rich and poor, and to men of every rank and age. And so what is really significant about this quote is he's saying, regardless of your rank, whether you are a king or whether you are a peasant, right? Whether you're rich or poor, it doesn't matter, right? Christ cares about all. And so as we feel compelled to go and share this good news to everybody. And so what it does is in a sense, it creates a level playing field, right? Where Christianity isn't just for those that are in leadership or for kings, right? It's for everybody. And so it created more of a level playing field in terms of what was taking place in the Middle Ages, which essentially enables each individual to have rights, right? Under God and under God's law, we are equal. We all have rights. Luigi, do you want to add something to that?
I had a question.
Yes.
So since everybody was embracing Christianity, not just rich people, how did they all hear about Christianity at the same time? Were there like local churches that everybody was going to?
Yeah, so various different missionaries. And so we only talked about a few of the key notable ones. There are many different individuals we can talk about, but we just talked about a few. But there were many people that were missionaries that are not noted here that were literally, they made it their life's goal to preach the gospel throughout Europe. And so there are various little churches that began all over Europe, right? And we're only talking about some of the key figures. And so these conversions are happening due to many people getting saved and feeling compelled to go preach the gospel, kind of like what happened during the Great Awakening. So, Luigi, did you have another question? Follow up?
Yeah, so were there ever any conflicting doctrines back then between different missionaries? Like now that there's different doctrines of Christianity? Or
Yeah.
were people more just, one?
So two key ones, right? We had those that were kind of Arianist, where they believed that Jesus, for example, was the Son of God and that he was God. However, they did not believe that there was such thing as the Trinity. So they didn't believe in the Holy Spirit, right? Where you have other missionaries who believe in the Trinity, right? And so there were different doctrines that began to conflict, right? And there were debates that took place during this time. However, for the most part, individuals were getting saved and believing that Jesus was God and that he had died for their sins. But yes, there were theological questions and clashes that began to take place during this time, which still take place today in the various different churches that we have today, right? And the different viewpoints and beliefs, right? And so those did start back then, yes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Naomi?
Oh, no.
Oh, I thought maybe I had your hand up. All right. So we're going to move to our next slide. All right. And so what's the impact of this? All right. And so British Christianity was largely responsible for the spread of Western civilization. Okay. And so monks, kind of like what Luigi just asked, they spread monasteries all over Europe. And so you now have men who were dedicated previously to warfare, right, and to their own pagan rituals and beliefs. They are getting saved and they feel the need to go all over Europe and to evangelize and to learn about the gospel. And so what you have is these different monasteries beginning to pop up throughout Europe. So men begin to dedicate their lives to the practice and the teachings of Christ. And this was a huge conversion, and they were popping up in such rapid rates all throughout Europe. Okay, and so before, where you had an established papal power that was independent of Rome. So papal supremacy basically is the doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church that the Pope, by reason of his office as vicar of Christ and as pastor of the entire Christian church, has full, supreme, and universal power over the whole church, a power which he can always exercise unhindered. All right, so there's this idea of papal supremacy where the Pope has pretty much all the control over the church. Okay, and so these different conversions were taking place before this papal power had been put into practice. And so it was more independent from Rome. So, for example, in Rome, a lot of the various leaders, all right, or the emperors, they felt like they were subject to a certain degree to the Pope. And so what the Pope deemed was right, they would kind of follow. And so these conversions that were taking place were independent. They were free from this papal supremacy or this idea that the Pope has complete control, right? And so because of that freedom or the release of feeling like you had to answer to the Pope, Christianity had the opportunity to spread at a much greater rate. Does that make sense? So you didn't feel like you had to answer to the Pope or to be completely aligned with everything the Pope told you to do. You now have this freedom of, hey, I'm a Christian. I believe this is true. I'm going to choose personally to just go to others and to be a missionary. And so there's a great freedom within the Christianity that began to be established in these various Germanic tribes. All right. And so finishing our last slide of the day, like we always do, we're going to talk about, so what? Why is this significant? Why is it important in terms of Western civilization? Well, the conversion of Germanic tribes provided spiritual, moral, intellectual, political glue to hold Europe together. All right, so there were spiritual conversions that were taking place. There were moral conversions. You began to have people that began to act in a more moral and humane way. It opened the idea for intellectual practices to take place, for reasoning, right? People to think in a rational manner. What is most beneficial for our society today and moving forward? And as we talked about earlier, it was the political glue to hold Europe together. So it was a key factor in stabilizing Europe. So you go from destruction, chaos, and a decline to a stabilized state throughout Europe. All right, so secondly, it creates a Europe with common culture, beliefs, and values. And so if the majority of individuals convert to Christianity, you begin to have common beliefs, a common culture, and common values, right? So for example, as us as a small Christian school, all right, the most of us believe in Jesus, right? And so with that, we have similar, through our beliefs, we have similar values and a similar culture and similar things that we assimilate with, right? And so this creates a uniformity, so to speak, throughout Europe. All right, and one of the things we looked at early on was accommodation, which creates a mix of Christian and pagan culture. And so it accommodated all people, where certain individuals would convert to Christianity and believe that way. However, there were those that would hold on to their pagan practices. And so you'll see today, for example, in China, Christianity is spreading rapidly, although you may not see it on mainstream news, right? However, there's a great majority that are holding on to their traditional practices or beliefs, you know, whether that's because of the political leaders who don't allow it, right? However, you had a good mix of both. And this was the same thing back then, and same in the United States as well. Okay, and so for some people, there was a trouble to compromise their beliefs, you know, due to certain superstition, violence, idols, or religion. And so there were some pagan religions that they believed strongly in superstition. And so they felt like it would not be right to convert to Christianity, and they needed to hold on to their previous belief systems. And a lot of their previous belief systems were based on various idols, and a lot of their practices were very violent. And so you were not, when we talk about Germanic conversion to Christianity, you know, there were many that did not subscribe to that. And it's important to understand that. All right, and so ultimately this was a refining process in which, you know, a lot of Europe was changed and converted, and morals were present. However, it wasn't unanimous. You can't say a whole group of people converted. You could say a great majority did, but not everybody converted. All right. Are there any questions? We're going to watch just a short little clip of the spread of Christianity throughout Europe. It's only going to be a couple minutes long. Does anybody have any questions before we watch that video? No? All right. So let me pull that up. Let me stop sharing with you for a second. All right. Can everybody see my screen? We good? All right.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. All right, so that just gives you a little bit of a visual of the spread that took place of Christianity throughout the various parts of Europe. And so, if there are no more questions in terms of our lecture today, just a quick reminder that in terms of homework, your lecture paper, your first lecture paper is due today, right? Okay, and I see a few of you have already turned it in. Good job. Are there any additional questions on what I expect in terms of your lecture paper, Isaiah?
Yeah, I started it yesterday. I just need a template, I think, because I don't want to like mess it up.
Okay, I will post a template right after this. You can still look at your syllabus as well with the guidelines, but right after this, I'll post a template of what it should look like, okay?
Thank you.
You got it. Are there any additional questions in terms of your lecture paper? No? All right, so everybody can log into GradeLink after class. I will post your reading homework for tonight. And if there are no additional questions, we are done with today's lecture. Thank you guys for all your participation. You guys did a great job with your readings and your responses, so I really appreciate you guys.
Thank
any
you.
other questions? No? All right, guys. Well, have a great day, and I will see you guys tomorrow in class.
Bye, Mr. Kayne.
Bye.
Good
Have a
day.
good day.
Okay?
Bye, Mr. King.